after more than 3 years of presidential office. It's a good time to take stock of Gustavo Petro's administration at the helm of Latin America's fourth-largest economy. Expectations were high about what might happen in the coffee-growing country under the leadership of what many considered to be the first leftist president. Some predicted a total failure of the government's economic performance, while others, more optimistically, hoped for some changes in the management of a country characterized by multiple corruption scandals and violence in recent years. Neither has happened, and Colombia has managed to sustain economic growth, albeit rather mediocre. But the corruption scandals and violence have not stopped. According to various media outlets, on the contrary, illegal groups are increasingly gaining sway in different territories, and corruption scandals have not stopped making headlines almost weekly in the press and media. But we're going to focus primarily on the economic issue. If we were to review only the recent figures announced by Gustavo Petro in his speech to Congress, many might consider the results to be good. Economic growth in the first quarter of 2025 was 2.7%. Poverty reduction was significant last year, reaching historic lows of 31%. Unemployment also reached historic lows of 8.6%, and inflation finally fell below 5%. But this is only a small part of the picture, and when the overall picture is reviewed, the situation changes completely, and we can say that the results are rather mediocre or even quite negative, as is the case with fiscal management, which we will review later. Let's begin by reviewing perhaps the most important indicator of a country's economy, economic growth. This allows us to assess whether the economy is growing and achieve greater job and wealth creation. In that indicator, the results are truly mediocre. In 2023, growth was only 0.7% annually, even reaching a quarter of negative growth and on the verge of recession. By 2024, things improved only slightly, and annual growth was a rather mediocre 1.7%. But why can positive growth be considered mediocre if Colombia's economy grew more than most developed and European economies? Because Colombia is not a developed country. According to organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the OECD, the per capita income level, or GDP per capita, required to consider a country developed is at least $30,000 per year. Colombia has a per capita GDP of $8,500, and when adjusted for purchasing power parity, it is $21,500. This is still quite far from the OECD average of $45,000, and a significant difference compared to countries like Chile and Uruguay, which have per capita incomes above $30,000 per year. But why can Petro's administration be considered to have negatively affected economic growth? There are several reasons. The first is that he had barely begun his term, and despite his high popularity, he presented a tax reform to Congress that many considered anti-technical and unsuitable for economic recovery. Colombian unions disagreed with this tax reform, as it excessively penalized sectors that have been driving growth in recent years, such as mining and energy. The reform primarily targeted oil and coal, causing investment in these sectors and foreign investment to sharply slow down in recent years. Additionally, while the reform increased taxes on high-income individuals, it did not broaden the tax base. As evidenced by a recent analysis by the media outlet La Silvaca, it is estimated that more than 6,000 people considered super rich left the country, again affecting investment and generating the opposite effect on tax collection, since when many of the so-called wealthy left, they stopped contributing their taxes to the country's development. Furthermore, Gustavo Petro has repeatedly clashed with unions and industrialists, even using expressions to refer to them as slave owners, vampires, and orangutans of greed, and even comparing them to Pablo Escobar in the case of the energy sector. Additionally, relations with unions and business leaders have been tense and have not been characterized by the search for agreements, but rather by the imposition of different provisions. These conflictive relations with the productive sector have had a significant negative impact on investment and confidence, as investment in machinery and infrastructure has fallen significantly in recent years. Political uncertainty has also had a negative effect on foreign direct investment, which for 2025 is at quite low levels, below $5 billion. Very low figures for an economy that should attract resources from abroad to grow and generate new jobs. Another decision that undoubtedly negatively affected economic growth was the failure to sign new oil and gas exploration contracts. Due to an ideological bias, Petro decided that no new exploration contracts would be signed during this administration. But the big problem is that this decision has very negative consequences for the economy. On the one hand, it is an unprecedented decision that not even wealthy countries like Canada or Norway have taken. It is already evident how gas reserves have been tremendously affected, even necessitating gas imports from other countries, increasing prices for end consumers in both the industrial and private sectors. Of course, this decision also affected direct investment in the mining and energy sector, and in the future, it could also affect oil reserves, generating a gradual decline in oil production and crude oil exports, which are a fundamental source of dollars for the country. As if that were not enough, Gustavo Petro appointed Ricardo Roa, his former campaign manager, as president of Ecopetrol, Colombia's main oil company. Roa, who many believe lacked the technical qualifications for the position, and has also been involved in multiple possible corruption scandals. Additionally, Petro's government had proposed and successfully appointed members of Ecopetrol's board of directors who have had no experience or track record in the sector, who have been appointed primarily because of their political ties to the current president. Attacking this sector is a shot in the foot, as it is one of the largest contributors to tax revenue, and its exports are the most important source of dollars for the Colombian economy, which is very, very low export levels. Logically, the poor results have not been long in coming, and Ecopetrol's last quarter's profits have been the worst in recent years. Although crude oil prices have fallen, in other quarters with similar average oil prices, the results have been much better. This drop in profits naturally affects its main shareholder, the Colombian state, which is seeing dividend income from what was once the largest Colombian company plummet. Of course, the situation and the drop in revenue due to inflated expectations have led to proposal for a new tax reform that would once again affect the incipient economic recovery and could once again discourage investment, consumption, and economic growth. Specifically, in recent years, the export trend has been negative. While there has been an increase in non-traditional sectors, the country exports very little. For comparison, total exports in 2024 only reached $50 billion, less than a tenth of Mexico's annual exports of more than $600 billion. Similarly, relations with its main trading partner, the United States, have not been the best. Just a few months ago, Petro had a heated confrontation with U.S. President Donald Trump over the deportation of some citizens in handcuffs. Gustavo Petro responded hastily and emotionally, without using diplomatic channels, and without taking into account that the United States is the main trading partner for Colombian exports. During the impasse, President Trump threatened tariffs of 50%, but thanks to diplomatic efforts, the crisis was quickly resolved. The crisis occurred just days before Valentine's Day, a day when flower sales in the United States are multi-million-dollar, and major job creators were involved. Had the entry of Colombian products been blocked, the sector's losses would have been tremendous, as these were perishable products. Another flaw in the Petro administration's economic management has been the lack of a clear economic recovery plan seeking consensus with the productive sector to promote the reactivation of the most affected sectors. Likewise, one of the hardest hit sectors has been construction, due to the government's substantial reduction in home purchase subsidies, which were a mechanism to revive the construction sector and allow primarily low-income sectors to access their own homes. But the big question then becomes, why has the Colombian economy, despite the tremendous mistakes of the Gustavo Petro administration, not entered an economic crisis? There are basically four factors that have managed to sustain the Colombian economy. First, there is the increase in remittances sent by Colombian workers from abroad. It is estimated that more than 1 million people have left the country in the last 3 years in search of better opportunities. The income sent by these migrants is already greater than what the country receives from oil exports. By 2024, the country's remittance income was approximately $12 billion, and even higher figures are expected this year. One of the drawbacks of this migration phenomenon is that it shows how the country fails to offer sufficient job opportunities, especially for young people, leading to the migration of a significant portion of the working population. Furthermore, many of these citizens are in an irregular situation in these countries. The second factor that has managed to sustain the Colombian economy has been the improvement of the tourism sector, where it is projected that the country could receive 7 million tourists per year, generating revenues of approximately $10 billion per year. Last year's tourism sector growth was over 12%, but once again, the government's management of the tourism sector leaves much to be desired. Insecurity levels have not improved, and according to multiple sources, illegal groups have managed to increase their control over certain areas, increasing kidnappings and extortion, and further damaging the country's negative image abroad. And precisely the third reason for the Colombian economy's sustainability is due to illicit crops and the shipment of illegal substances. The cultivation of the leaf used to make the white powder has reached a record of more than 250,000 hectares. According to estimates from unofficial sources, exports of the illegal white substance could represent more than $18 billion annually. This money is a major source of funding for illegal armed groups that destabilize the state itself, even allegedly assassinating presidential candidate Miguel Uribe Taboy recently. The fourth factor that has sustained the Colombian economy is the increase in non-traditional exports, especially agricultural products. The sector has also benefited from the rise in the international price of coffee. Last year, the country managed to export nearly $12 billion in agricultural products, with an annual growth of more than 13%, and the trend is expected to continue by 2025. This could possibly be considered one of the main achievements of Petro's administration, as it was one of his campaign promises. However, there is still much to be done to modernize the sector and increase the agricultural export basket. But without a doubt, the worst mistake in the Petro administration's economic management has been the fiscal issue. The decision, without any justification, to break the fiscal rule would lead to an increase in the fiscal deficit to levels similar to those experienced during the pandemic, due to extremely high state spending. Some analysts believe that a large part of the spending is due to the increase in public procurement, primarily seeking political support in the upcoming elections. It is estimated that some 450,000 public sector jobs have been created during this administration, which has also helped to mask the apparently positive unemployment figures. And precisely for the following year, the government, instead of trying to tighten its belt, would present a new budget with spending increases and debt payment deferrals, a decision that would lead to a very high fiscal deficit and an increase in debt as a percentage of GDP. This situation led credit rating agencies to recently downgrade Colombia's debt rating, in addition to warning about the country's fiscal sustainability. This mismanagement has led the country to borrow at the highest rates in the last 20 years, which are even higher than the rates the government borrowed during the pandemic. These tremendous interest rates will lead to an ever-increasing percentage of the national budget having to be dedicated to debt payments, in addition to tying the hands of the next administration. This does not help the central bank lower interest rates with the speed required for economic recovery. Therefore, in conclusion, although the Colombian economy is currently managing to survive the economic management of the Petro administration, its management has actually been quite questionable and has not been a positive factor for economic recovery and recovery. In a subsequent video, if you give us a like and share the content, we will analyze the reforms proposed by the Petro administration and its management of inflation. Remember that in the video description, you will find a link to the best course to learn technical and fundamental analysis for investing in stocks. There is also a link to the best platform for buying stocks on the stock exchange, regulated in the United States. If you liked the video, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and share the content.